So this is going to be a comparison between the iPhone 14 Pro Max versus the OnePlus 10 Pro. So this might be for someone who's either thinking of making the switch from OnePlus to iPhone, or thinking of buying one of these two, or just want to know how they stack up. So let's go ahead and talk about them. Starting off the design, it's going to be very different in the way they feel and they look and the materials they use. So for one, both of them do have that stovetop like camera array system. So they look kind of similar, but the way they're implemented are very different. So on the OnePlus 10 Pro, you do have the aluminum frame that kind of just blends into the camera array with itself. And it doesn't have much of a camera bump. Like, it doesn't rock too much on the table. It does rock a little bit, but not too much. And then on the iPhone, it just has some like big camera bump on top of the lenses already sticking out quite a bit. So this phone rocks a lot more than the OnePlus 10 Pro does. And then the iPhone has a more just flat out design all around. So it's flat on the back, flat on the sides, and it's just overall a bricky feeling device because it is relatively heavy as well, and it's wide and it's tall. So it's a big, hefty of a phone. So if you like that, then that's great. The only thing I don't like about it is that it is a slippery device. I mean, most phones nowadays are slippery because they're glass. So the sides are a glossy type material. It is stainless steel. I believe it's Corning Gorilla Glass on the back, and then on the front, it's a combination of Corning Gorilla Glass and I think like ceramic shield. The one thing I do like is that because it's flat, I can easily install a screen protector, versus on the OnePlus 10 Pro, it's like a rounded design all around. So that includes both the front display and the back. So you got some soft rounded edges. It's also matte and it's also glossy on the sides. But because it's rounded, the front display, it's tough to install a screen protector for it. So you can get like a flex type display. I think there's like plasticky type feeling ones. I'm not a fan of them, so I never install a screen protector on devices like this. In fact, I'm pretty sure when I got the OnePlus 10 Pro, it came pre-installed with a plastic screen protector, but I ended up like ripping off a little piece off of it. So I just ended up taking it off completely. But my OnePlus 10 Pro here has a ton of micro scratches, hairline scratches, and it even has a pretty big gash already now down like the middle side. It's very small, but still noticeable when you're putting your finger through it and also picking at it with a nail. So yeah, just keep that in mind, that if you really want to keep your phone protected as much as possible, you might want to get a display that has a flat display. So the OnePlus 10 Pro unfortunately has those edges on the side. And just speaking of display, actually, the OnePlus 10 Pro does have a 6.7-inch display as well as the iPhone 14 Pro Max. But as you can see, the OnePlus 10 Pro is a bit thinner versus the iPhone, that's more wider and also about the same height. But the OnePlus 10 Pro just ends up being a bit thinner. So in the hand, I would say the OnePlus 10 Pro definitely feels the most comfortable just because it's thinner, so it's easier to hold in the hand, and the edges are also softer and rounded, so it feels a lot more comfortable when you're holding it in your hand, versus the iPhone feels like a brick. It feels kind of sharp a little bit on the edges, so I definitely prefer to have a case on, actually both of them, but I definitely prefer to have it on my iPhone just because it adds a little bit of grippiness and also softens that edge a little bit more. On the OnePlus 10 Pro, I also use a case. The phone itself is also very lightweight, so I ended up getting a thin fit type of case, so it's very thin, adds minimum protection, but it adds some grippiness and also adds just a little bit of more small weight to it. It doesn't add much weight, versus on the iPhone, the case I have is a D-brand grip case, and it just adds a bunch of extra weight to it, which it's already a big phone, so I figured might as well keep it going and make it even bigger and heavier. On the iPhone, you do have Lightning at the bottom, which I'm not a huge fan of, and on the OnePlus 10 Pro, you have USB-C. Both of them have some type of fast charging, but the OnePlus 10 Pro has way better fast charging at 65 watts, so it can charge up in like 47 minutes, versus the iPhone takes around like an hour and 30 to 45 minutes, so it takes quite a long time. But the benefit of the iPhone is that it lasts a lot more, so it can last me sometimes about a day and a half to at most maybe like 2 or 2.5 days. So if I'm not really using the iPhone, because sometimes I'm switching devices, if I'm not using the iPhone, this thing will last in standby mode without the always on display for like 2 or 3 days, which is insane. So if you're someone who doesn't really use your device that much and just wants it for phone calls and texting, don't know why you would get an expensive iPhone, but it could last you for quite a long time. Versus on the OnePlus 10 Pro, I would say it lasts me maybe about a day's worth of battery. So I could get maybe till about like 7 or 8 p.m. If I'm not using it that much, like on my work days, I'm barely using my phone because I'm working, I can definitely get to the end of the day with no problem. But if you're a heavier user, you're definitely going to end up having to charge this device at some point during the day, which is no problem because you have that 65 watt charger, which by the way does come in a box, and it will charge up your phone pretty fast. so you can just top up for like a couple 15 to 20 minutes and you'll have more than enough battery left to get you to the rest of the day. Both of them also have wireless charging, and the iPhone actually does have MagSafe, so it does use a magnet to stick onto some specific MagSafe chargers, whereas on the OnePlus you just have regular G wireless charging. And since I mentioned it already, the always on display, both of them have it available, but the iPhone currently with this iOS version does only allow you to have both the wallpaper and your widgets and stuff turned on, so it kind of looks like the phone is always turned on. Not a fan of it, but I'm sure, or I saw actually in future updates, that you'll be available to customize what you want to have on and off. On the OnePlus, you can do a little bit of customization, but it's mainly just like your specific information that'll show versus your whole wallpaper. And continuing on with those displays, both of them are 1440p-ish, 120 hertz, OLED, AMOLED, whatever you want to call it. I believe the iPhone calls it like a Retina XDR display. They're both great displays in my opinion. The only issue I have with the OnePlus potentially is because it is a thinner aspect ratio. Sometimes some videos do cut off a little bit more versus on the iPhone that's more, I wouldn't call it rectangular or 16:9-ish ratio, but it's closer to that ratio, so most content fits better on the iPhone in my opinion versus on the OnePlus. But still, it's a great viewing experience nevertheless because it's a colorful, vibrant, bright, just wonderful display on both of them. I think whichever one you get, you won't be disappointed. At least you do have minimum bezels and a minimum intrusion with that camera array or camera cutout, because it doesn't really get in the way. It's in the corner. You don't get bothered by it. Versus on the iPhone, you do have that pill cutout, which in my opinion is just ugly and unnecessary. But I get it because you got to make it a gimmick. Plus, it comes with Face ID, and Face ID, we'll get into biometrics in a little bit, but it holds those Face ID sensors and stuff like that. So it does get in the way in my opinion, just because sometimes it starts to peek in some aspect ratio videos. I think if a video it has like a wider aspect ratio, you can start to see the notch or the the pill cutout just poking a little bit into your content. And once you pinch the zoom, it's going to get in the way in my opinion. I think it's kind of dumb looking, but you do have some cool software features with it, which includes the dynamic island stuff. So it'll sometimes increase in size and just include some like notification stuff or access to some quick settings for certain apps when you listen to music or a timer or something like that. It's cool, but I could really care less for it. Now, as far as those biometrics, it is going to beat the Face ID versus facial recognition plus the under-display fingerprint sensor on the OnePlus 10 Pro. In my opinion, I would say both the facial recognition and the under-display fingerprint sensor add up together to compete equally with the Face ID, because Face ID, 95% of the time, it's perfect. It's fine. You don't have any issues with it, but there's always that percent of the time where it sometimes doesn't recognize me, especially in the morning when I wake up, has trouble recognizing me. But I like that at least it does recognize me in the dark sometimes, so it can get into my device in lower light situations. But if it can't recognize me, I hate that you have to use your pin pad. Whereas on the OnePlus 10 Pro, it has facial recognition and the under-display fingerprint sensor. Sometimes it could be hit or miss on either, but at least you have the other one to back you up. So if your facial recognition doesn't recognize you, you at least have your under-display fingerprint sensor. And then vice versa as well. If your fingerprint sensor doesn't recognize you, you have facial recognition. So I would always prefer to have both options, because the more options, the better, even though they might not be the best options. I'm not going to say they're bad. I think the under-display fingerprint sensor definitely could be a little bit faster, or maybe recognize you a little bit better when you press your finger down pretty fast, because you do have to hold it down for like, I don't know, like a second versus just like tapping it or something like that. But either way, honestly, biometrics is great on both of them. I would still prefer the option of both, which is why I prefer the OnePlus 10 Pro for that. Some other cool things around the device is that both of them actually kind of similarly have the same hardware buttons and ports. Well, obviously not lightning, but they both have the power button on the right hand side and then the volume rocker on the left hand side. And then both of them also have a mute switcher. So on the iPhone, it's just two options, either mute or ring. On the OnePlus 10 Pro, it's three options. You have mute, ring, and then you also have vibrate. Now, technically, mute on the iPhone is technically vibrate as well, but either way, I like the option, or I like the fact that you have the option of all three sound modes versus just two different sound modes. But either way, I think it's great that they both provide those kind of hardware features. Now, as far as the speakers, I honestly think both of them sound plenty good enough in my opinion. If anything, the iPhone just sounds a little bit fuller with a little bit more bass, but you can be the judge of that. The iPhone 14 Pro Max does have the IP rating, IP68 water resistant and dust resistant, versus the OnePlus 10 Pro doesn't have an official rating, but I've used it in the shower. I've like dropped a couple water to it every now and then, and even in this video with B-roll, I splash it with water and I've had no issues. So technically, it might survive some splashes of water, but take that with a grain of salt. And the iPhone also doesn't have the physical SIM card slot here in the US, so if you're not into eSIMs yet, which with my carrier, I've had my mother try an eSIM, and she was having a couple of issues here and there, and I had to tweak a little bit of stuff in her settings, but that might be a carrier stuff. So I don't know. I think eSIM is probably going to end up being the future, so it's okay. But for people who travel, people who want to have maybe dual numbers, it might not be the best option. On the OnePlus 10 Pro, you do have at least that SIM card available. As far as the performance, it is going to be the iPhone's A16 Bionic chip with 6 GB of RAM versus the OnePlus 10 Pro's Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 with 8 GB of RAM on this particular model. So this was one of the first phones to have that new chipset when it came out last year. So that chipset was known to get warm over time, but it does have pretty good performance and might not be as top tier as the A16, but it's still fantastic. So for my everyday stuff, I have literally no issues. Just browsing around social media, checking the internet, browsing shopping apps, playing the occasional game, all that stuff, I have no issue at all. Of course, once you start to use it a little bit more heavily, whether it be using it for a long extended period or playing heavier games, heavier intensive games that require more graphical settings and stuff like that, you will experience that the phone does tend to warm up eventually. Same thing with the iPhone. Eventually, both of them will warm up, and that's pretty basic in every phone. Every phone would eventually get to the point that you can start to feel a little bit warm. But unfortunately, on the OnePlus 10 Pro, you sometimes do see a little bit of hit in the performance where you'll either notice the game start to maybe have a little bit of slower refresh rate, or frame rate, I should say, or you'll notice some choppiness in the animations here and there. Versus on the iPhone, I found that even though it got warm, it was still able to kick out and punch out some great consistent performance. So no matter what I did, no matter how long I was doing it for, the iPhone was always consistently performing. But otherwise, performance is honestly pretty good on both of them. As far as software, it is going to come down to your personal preference, but it's going to be iOS 16 versus Android 13 with Oxygen OS. On iOS 16, I think it's a lot more fluid and cleaner. Now, of course, it probably has to do it with also the 120 Hz that the iPhone 14 Pro Max has available with the display. Just ends up being super snappy and super smooth. I think the animations are dang perfect on the iPhone. Versus on Oxygen OS / on the OnePlus 10 Pro, it's a little bit weird sometimes. Sometimes it has like slower animations that it tries to copy the animations of iOS, and it just looks too slow for my liking. You could go into the developer settings and like speed up the animations if you wanted to, but out of the box and stock settings, it just looks a little bit slow. I can tell that they want to make it look smooth and clean, but I would maybe speed up the animations if I were you. But either way, I think it's still an overall smooth experience. It definitely helps with the 120 Hz display as well, but definitely not as smooth as iOS 16 in my opinion. So you do have the ability to customize the lock screen, which is a little bit more than what the OnePlus 10 Pro has to offer with the lock screen customization, because there's barely anything you can do, which is surprising. So for once, iOS 16 does have something on top of Android or just Oxygen OS in general. So you can set up focus modes, you can set up your time clock and change up a little bit with the style, the color, your wallpaper, your depth, whatever you want to do. There's a couple of options you can mess with to add some customization and personalization to your lock screen. But that's pretty much where it ends. So once you hop into the device itself, the home screen, there's pretty much nothing that you can do. So all your apps have to be forced up to the top, and that's pretty much it. You can't change the grid size either. You do have the app library and stuff like that, but again, you can't move around where you want your apps. The app developer chooses where they want the apps to be categorized by. Versus on Oxygen OS or Android, you have the freedom to move apps anywhere. You can also customize other special stuff on your home screen, such as the grid size, but you can also customize the transitions and the animations of your home screen. You can also customize the app icons. So for one, choose the style you want with either the preset settings that they have available, or just bring in a whole third-party app and add your own customizable icons there. You can do that with iOS 16 as well with like a third-party app. But I believe you have to go in and customize every single individual app, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong, correct me if I'm wrong. I've seen the customized OS experiences or iOS 16s, but it seems like a lot of work to do that. Versus on Oxygen OS, it's so much simpler and easier to do. So I like that I can customize my icons and all that stuff straight into stock settings. You also have other unique features on each one. So on the OnePlus 10 Pro, you do have something called the shelf, which basically is similar to iOS 16's little widget area. So you can just add a bunch of widgets and have another section to get to your widgets instead of having them on your home screen if you wanted to. And speaking of widgets, iOS 16 does allow you to stack widgets. So if you want to keep areas more clean and not have too many wallpapers or too many pages, I should say, you just stack the widgets and you can just scroll through them and use them as you please. Oxygen OS also recently introduced a sidebar, which is similar to the Edge toolbar that that Samsung has, which is pretty cool. It is a little bit more limited compared to Samsung's, but still cool that you have the ability to just drag it over and hide a couple other apps and just quickly get to them and use them. The thing you have to do with this one though is that you have to drag and drop them into either a split screen mode or window mode, which by the way, multitasking is so much better on the OnePlus 10 Pro as well, because on the iPhone, all you can do is picture in picture. And on top of that, you're restricted to have either the picture in picture or the window flow either at the top or at the bottom. You can't have it towards the middle. Versus on the OnePlus, you can have it anywhere. Obviously you can resize on both of them, but you can have it anywhere at the top, the middle, or whatever. It just has to be towards the side. But you can also split screen. Now, not all apps are compatible and some apps may just crash when you're using this, but still, the ability to do it is awesome. Just because you have the option to do it doesn't mean you have to do it, but it's still a cool feature. And again, you can also use window mode, which is just dropping a bunch of windows or dropping apps that look like windows and then just use them that way. It's very useful for like a calculator, stuff like that. You don't have to use a whole calculator for your whole screen. You just drop it, use it for a quick calculation, and you're good to go. The OnePlus 10 Pro also has the Discover page that most other Android devices have, but the one cool thing that I noticed that this only is available on the OnePlus 10 Pro, or Oxygen OS I should say, is the quick search bar and the Discover page. I don't know why anyone else doesn't have it, because it's so much more convenient to have it there and just quickly search for stuff there when I need to, instead of having it on my home page. I think it's a much cooler implementation in my opinion. Not sure why Google doesn't have it, not sure why Samsung doesn't have it. I think everyone else should include that as well. And quickly touching on ecosystem, obviously I think iOS is going to win it here. It's got a much stronger ecosystem in my opinion in both hardware and software. So for one, you can connect to other iPhone devices or iOS devices or other Apple products in general, whether it be your own products or someone else's products, and just makes it easier to collaborate with other people. Versus on the Oxygen OS or just OnePlus in general, the hardware probably isn't the strongest, and software, it's all Google reliant, or yeah, pretty much that. So anything that's Google related or Google set up, you can connect to with the OnePlus 10 Pro. You can also connect to Samsung ecosystem stuff. So for example, you can use Samsung watches and all that stuff. But I would say for first party ecosystem stuff and first party accessories and whatnot, it's going to be a lot stronger on the iPhone 14 Pro Max or just Apple products in general. As far as how long your software is going to be supported, on the iPhone, you should be getting around like 5 or even maybe even 6 years of software support here. So you'll get a long life of the iPhone 14 Pro Max. On the OnePlus 10 Pro, I believe they just announced that they're going to be upping it to 4 years of major OS updates and then 5 years of security updates, but that might be starting for phones in 2023. I'm not entirely sure, but it could be around that. If it is, I mean, this phone definitely deserves it in my opinion. But if it is, then that's fantastic. But if it isn't, I don't know exactly how much they're promised. I think maybe 2 or 3 years of major OS updates, which in that case, kind of a bummer, because this phone can definitely last you for a long time. As far as the cameras, it's definitely going to come down to your personal preference, because there is a little bit of a difference here, especially when it comes to video. But in my opinion, I think both of them are really good. Now, the first thing I do want to know is that if you're going to use your camera a lot for social media, for like Snapchat, Instagram, or TikTok, you're definitely going to want to go with the iPhone just because it's better optimized for those apps. Whereas on the OnePlus 10 Pro, they're not optimized, so it does struggle quite a bit, or just looks rough when you're using your camera on one of those apps. But when you're actually using the camera app, I think both of them take great photos. So I would say the OnePlus 10 Pro just leans a little bit towards more of the vibrancy end. So it just adds a little bit more color, a little bit more punch for you. So it kind of like edits the photo for you, in my opinion. Versus on the iPhone, it tends to lean more towards the natural side. Does add a little bit of vibrancy sometimes, but it's always going to be a lot more vibrant, or a little bit more unrealistic to what I see on the OnePlus 10 Pro. One thing to note is that the ultra wide is going to be a little bit wider on the iPhone, with just a 0.5x versus a 0.6x on the OnePlus 10 Pro. And also you have autofocus on the ultra wide on the iPhone, so you can get close to like a subject and get like a macro like shot, which is pretty cool. The iPhone and the OnePlus 10 Pro also have a telephoto, which the iPhone is going to be at a 3x versus the OnePlus 10 Pro, it's going to be at a 3.3x. And I think, again, both of them do a pretty good job overall. And when it comes to the digital zoom, the iPhone actually only caps out at 15x versus the OnePlus 10 Pro can double it, can go up to a 30x. But it's not the best in my opinion. It looks pretty rough in my opinion. So if you're going to be zooming in a lot further, I would stick to around 10x max, just because digital zoom on both of them isn't the greatest, but I would prefer the 15x of the iPhone sometimes over the OnePlus, but sometimes it can impress me. But either way, the cameras for photos on the back is pretty good overall on both of them. And when it comes to video, I'm going to give it to the iPhone right away. So both of them can record 4K, and the OnePlus 10 Pro actually has the option of 8K. Not going to use that or ever touch that, but I noticed that for one, again, similar to the colors of the video, or colors of the photos, I should say, on the OnePlus 10 Pro, it again leans more towards the more vibrant side and more vibrant color. And also I noticed that when I'm switching between the ultra wide and the regular lens, the wide lens, it shifts a little bit in its color versus the iPhone stays consistent throughout the whole video. It's able to maintain the same colors whichever lens, with whatever lens you're using, and it just looks overall cleaner in my opinion. Just feels a little bit more stabilized, but it's not awful on the OnePlus 10 Pro. But where it does get bad in my opinion is once you start to zoom in. When you're using the telephoto, or actually you're not even using the telephoto on the OnePlus 10 Pro, because it just crops in using the main lens. On the iPhone, it uses its actual 3x telephoto, when you're in 4K at least. If you switch to 1080p, you will be able to use the telephoto on the OnePlus 10 Pro, but I'm not going to do that. I want 4K, so that's one downside when it comes to video on the back cameras. On the front side of the photos, I think look very good on both of them in my opinion. If anything, again, might be down to the color difference, but for me, I think both of them look plenty good enough. It really impressed me on the OnePlus 10 Pro. But the one thing is that the iPhone does have autofocus, so it does have the ability to get closer to a subject and actually focus on that subject. And then with video, again, the OnePlus 10 Pro just lacks here because it's only able to do 1080p on the front versus the iPhone can definitely do 4K. So that automatically takes the win on the iPhone for me. It just looks overall cleaner because of the quality in 4K, and just, again, it's iPhone video, so it just looks well stabilized, super clean, and kind of cinematic. I don't know, I just like the way iPhone takes video. And both of them have like other unique features and modes, I should say, when it comes to the camera. So cinematic mode, action mode on the iPhone, and then the OnePlus 10 Pro has that like fisheye and like super ultra wide mode. So I think it can go up to like a 0.4x or something like that. It can get wider than the ultra wide of the iPhone, but for natural mode, or natural camera mode, I should say, or normal camera mode, only allows a 0.6x. So if you really want the best camera, in my opinion, I would probably go for the iPhone because a video and photo combination ends up being really good. Versus on the OnePlus 10 Pro, I would say photos are really good, and then video is kind of good, but could be better in my opinion. So in the end, as far as how they stack up to each other, both of them will have a great display and pretty good hardware. But when it comes to like battery life, performance, and cameras, I would give it to the iPhone. And I would give the software experience, for my personal experience and my likings, to the OnePlus 10 Pro. So think about what's more important to you and choose from there. So if you already have a OnePlus 10 Pro, should you get the iPhone? Unless you really need that better stuff, then maybe, but honestly, no. I wouldn't trade in for this, no. I wouldn't give this up to get an iPhone, in my opinion. If you're with OnePlus, there's a reason you're with OnePlus. It's probably that software, so I would stick with OnePlus if I were you. If you're picking between these two devices, I would also tell you to get the OnePlus 10 Pro. The reason being is because pricing is a big factor, and I've seen this device go for as low as like under $600 for brand new. Killer deal, killer price. I would definitely snatch it up for that price if I were you. Versus the iPhone, you're paying well around like $1,200, $1,100 for this device. It's a lot more expensive. So that's how they stand up. That's how I would pick and how I would choose and how I would compare them. So let me know your comments, your thoughts, what you thought of these devices, and yeah, hope you guys enjoyed. Peace.